uh, as it has been asked to me to speak something on religion and society in Indian context. So I have worked on religion and society, but my work has been in, there has been different considerations. So there can be different level of engagement. For instance, there can be a conceptual correspondence or communication between Western philosophy and Indian religion. There can be social science engagement. For today, what I have thought of to speak is on the narrative tradition in India and their discourse on a issue which will be having a correspondence with an anthropological work of Levi-Strauss. So I will be coming to Levi-Strauss through Indian narrative tradition, and we will be reflecting on the condition of limit of understanding, something called limit of understanding, that I will be elaborating, and then I will going into the discussion. So that will be one of the way we always have a wish when I was a student to something we discuss on the Indian religion and Western knowledge systems, how to have a dialogue. So to move on any such type of comparative analysis, what is required to set up the context of discussion. So the context of discussion is the limit of understanding. Now, what is limit of understanding? Generally, suppose you face a situation where you always find a situation, you have to make a judgment between right and wrong. So, right and wrong, a judgment is not a limit of understanding. But for instance, you face in a situation where there are two right things. If you do one right, the other right is compromised, and if you do the other right, the another right, the first one may be compromised. So that is called, there is no option to think in such situation to respond. So, for instance, in political philosophy, if people are just a little bit aware of political philosophy, the limit of understanding is between liberty and equality. This is a very classical debate. So, the moment you talk about liberty or the liberal philosophy, the whole idea of importance of human autonomy, the question of human autonomy, that comes all stems from the liberal philosophy. Then the question of equality becomes a prominent. If you emphasize the question of equality, then what happens to the question of autonomy? And what stems first? What comes first as an observation? Is the human autonomy most important to pursue? So, for instance, in state policies, communist blocs and the capitalist bloc emphasize more on the human autonomy, question of freedom, and for the communist bloc, the value of equality has been more prominent. But if you pursue intellectually, both values are good in themselves. Any emphasis on any one value compromises the other. So that is called the experience in the political philosophy about paradox, contradiction, or a more better Greek word is called aporia. Aporia is a movement where two logical way of concluding something seems to be absolutely right, but together they produce an impasse. You cannot think beyond it. So this is called the limit of understanding. So now in our context, we will go for a limit of understanding. How an Indian narrative tradition can talk about with Levi-Strauss. So generally what we assume in Indian religion, with rituals, with certain type of practices which we find metaphysical. No, there are rich traditions, very very rich traditions, which have only question and inquiry of ethics. What is right, what is good, how to judge in life situation. So one of the very generally common narrative through storytelling we get of the Vikram Vedal. So Vikram Vedal generally we have all seen in our childhood. But when I was looking from a more intense intellectual point of view, I found the message is much deeper. So I just elaborate you first Vikram Vedal, what is the intellectual context of the story, and then we go and discuss the paper of Levi-Strauss on the family, and then reflect back from the story number 22. Generally, the story number 22 is the last story. So the general way of the presentation of the stories from the Vikram Betal is little bit different the way I am presenting. So I am interpreting the intention of the scholar. So the Vikram Betal is a story attributed to something called Som Dutt. There are two dates. One date goes back to 2500 years back, but other date is more reasonable, which is called something between 480 to 680. And it's actually the correspondence of life issues actually closely follows this time period of social life. So generally we can follow it, but that is not much interest for me. The Som Dutt bring up a plot, and in the plot there is a king and there is a ghost. So there is a situation in which something has to be accomplished, and now in the midst of a story, the ghost narrate a situation, and the king is Vikramaditya, very well known to always have taken a wiser decisions. He have never been, whatever the history is, he has never been found making a decision which has been wrong. Hence, this is also what you can logically think. He has always a knowledge to decide the thing. Now, in this situation, the plot is there, and Som Dutt, very intelligent narratives, very intelligent narrative. He brings 22 stories. Generally, now people there is also people who bring 25 stories, but I doubt it. 22 is the most seems to be authentic. Rest seems to be later addition. So in every situation, the ghost asks a king about a situation, that what is wrong, what has to be done, and he responds. Every time there is an answer. And whenever he responds, ghost go back on the tree. So he has to again try. The last story in which the king did not have any answer. Now the intention of the Som Dutt is to communicate something very radical of his age. This issue is about something you have to. The issue in which the second last story deals is something very intricate social context, like family, brother, sister, father, daughter, something which we value and we find is very primordial, eternal in our categorization. It has to be true. For instance, a taboo between blood relatives, between father and mother, a father and a daughter, a son and mother. And what has been the anthropological response? So we'll go to Levi-Strauss and see what he has thought about, and how he can be a communicator, he can have a dialogue with Levi-Strauss or structural anthropology. Now this is the plot on the context in which we will go and look to the story number 22. Now we go back to the context of our discussion to Levi-Strauss article, The Family. I think most of the people have read Levi-Strauss and their work on family. I don't know this article, The Family, people have read it. The article has two certain question to respond, Levi-Strauss question. The first question is, why we have certain type of universal experience of taboos? Why we have taboo? Why does it exist? And second question is, the Levi-Strauss take is that monogamous families which involve certain pattern of marriages is also, he says, it is, if you see the average for Levi-Strauss in the article, he says, if you say the primitive society, if you say the industrial society, monogamous families have been very successful. So Levi-Strauss says, what is an outcome of such a type of behavior, where you find blood relative has been tabooed and sanctioned by something, and also there is a monogamous family marriages. So the theme of taboo in his analysis of the family, and what you all already know, the cross cousin marriages pattern was Levi-Strauss always talk about. Then the parallel cousin, what this reveal. Now Levi-Strauss will go and do a structural anthropology, but most important, what is point of consideration is certain type of generalization from this. There are data, but you have to generalize in which direction the data is speaking. So Levi-Strauss does this analysis, and this I bring in front of you. His first argument is that why the taboo exists. Why there is some type of prohibition between the blood members. People would have easily mated with each other. Father, daughter, son, mother. Animals do it. Why the human beings don't do it? And this is the presence of certain level of taboo in blood members, close blood members, is all pervasive, found in all historical contexts. But this is what the paper said. Now, one of his argument is, and from this people are aware with the Levi-Strauss argument on marriages, Levi-Strauss say that marriage is not an individual necessity. No. He said it for individual to gratify certain type of emotions, it does not require a marriage. Yes, we find in the society there have been institutions of prostitution. Yes, people do not require. So why to have a family? That is a question Levi-Strauss puts. And his answer is very simple. He says it is a require of the group. What is a group? What you require, that's why you require a family too. It's not an individual who require it. By family, you produce a very, very basic, rudimentary form of a group life. And that is unavoidable. He said, so marriage is actually a necessity of a group rather than individual. That is the point. Now his first observation, first most important analysis of the taboo. Why the taboo exists. He says, what does taboo do it? Now marriage and family sometimes in some sense are in some type of functional relation, but also works in Levi-Strauss analysis in some sense of annihilating each other. The moment you make a taboo, he says, then there is something called, for some movement, there is some collectivity, some type of permanence in human group, which you form, you say in sense, you term is as a family. But the moment you follow the taboo stops people to breed within himself, and the rule of monogamy, cross cousin, the most successful than the parallel cousin, you have to marry outside. So there is a group which get a life togetherness, but by this rule it annihilates itself. Family get dissolved after some time. You make new families. So he said, what is the purpose of this? How I can interpret? Levi-Strauss spent his time. How I can interpret this? And second dimension of his analysis of that family has been on the question of cross cousin and parallel cousin. So taboo is a function because it does not allow you to marry inside, you have to marry outside. This is one of his points. Now cross cousin, he make a comparison. If you read the paper, then he make a comparison between parallel cousin and the cross cousin. And he, with his mathematical skill, he will show you that if you follow the parallel cousin, you will one group will end up less women coming to his group. So if one group gives a woman, he should also get a woman. But in parallel cousin system, you will not get it. But parallel cousin. In a cross cousin system, every group will end up having a woman back in the group. And also what he see as a point of, this is in the process of analysis, he see the communication get wider and wider and wider. Now Levi-Strauss interpreted these two characteristics of a family most successful as a symptom, certain type of historical. Now here we have to look to what he interpreted this fact. See, anthropology generally, when it has been taught to you, the basic criteria, basic orientation in anthropology to look for a human nature. Properties which are universal in character. Even if it is historical, there has to be evolutionary logic. Things are moving for a more reasonable type of organization. So he interpreted that actually taboo in a family annihilate the very basic condition of the staticness in the group. And he says that has been a great help to come to a modern age, to the modern life. Something progressive in nature. So that is interpretation of a structural anthropology of Levi-Strauss. And once he says now the more and more modern families emerge, the only prohibition as far as taboo is the blood close relatives, blood relative family, father, mother, brother and sister. Now the prescriptive limit whom to marry is withering away with the time. So it's a very progressive trend. This is very progressive trend. We find it very, very progressive. Now, it seems to be the analysis coming out of such type of analysis is that obviously it will essentialize certain properties. So taboos are good and taboos are inevitable, and taboos, this format of family and marriages will be logically, the things will be like that, this has to come out. So this is one way his paper on the family does a structural anthropological exercise which can be criticized from a numerous point of view. There has been already a criticism. But I am taking more productive challenge. Now, what can be the response of Indian tradition? Indian tradition, obviously there are many traditions. This tradition, the which tradition I am talking about, Somdath, what he write, he actually end up communicating to the readers, not his contemporary but future, any rules, regulations, and customs somehow get a justification of being certain type of characteristic, representative features and essence of human nature, properties, and which people feel right, people feel essential, people feel required to be followed by the future generation. Now, Somdat in his last story finishes this argument in very, very logical way. His last story is a story. I just cut short the story so that we can go and more have an academic intellectual observations, and we can draw something more out of it. His last story is a very simple story. The last story is a condition. What happened is a king and his a prince, and one is of one kingdom, and the queen and his daughter of one kingdom. So somehow the situation unfolds. There is a war, and the king of one state is killed, and the woman and the queen and his daughter is on the way. They are just roaming here and there, and the king and the prince of one state, they were at some place. They reached to a pond, and then they thought to have a bath. So once they reached to the pond, they saw footprints of two women, and the king said, such a beautiful footprints, how beautiful will be the woman themselves. So his son also gave acceptance. Yes, that is a great observation. So he said, there was two footprints. One was a bigger footprint, one was a smaller footprint. So his father said, the king said, the bigger will be a taller, maybe an older woman, I marry. If we get, and if they accept, and the smaller footprint will be of a younger age, my son will get married. And I believe that they will be very, very good for us. Somehow they come to know that they belong to a kingdom which has been annihilated, and now they are in very poor condition. But the dilemma appears. Actually, the story is what Som does narrate. Just a story, but his message is very deep and profound. The smaller footprint is of the queen, and the larger footprint is of the daughter of the queen. Now, this is what happened in the story, which is we have to think of. The king and son, and the queen and the daughter. Now, because of the earlier promise, they have to get married. All the stories: king marries the daughter, and queen marries the son. Now they produce a king, son and daughter, and he has to logically tell what should be the relationship between this. You see, it's not a story. It is an intellectual message towards understanding rules, practices as a truth about human nature and larger history. Whatever you will settle with one relation, if you settle, say, brother and sister, then they, as a wife, it all get unsettled. You try to solve this problem, you get only puzzle and contradiction. You will never able to solve it. So what is the message? The message is about the limit of understanding. The best rules to designate certain type of kingship pattern, certain type of practical and necessary relationship seems to be all logical. If you make someone father, it protects, it is functional to the life, it takes care of their kids, right? And if people get in ethical relation of a husband-wife, it is also feasible, it is also a good ploy, it is also workable, it has some function. But there can be an event which can completely put paradox to all the things what we have understood to do is. Then how you will solve it? This is called limit of understanding. So this is actually to how to view a story. What is the message? This is a very simple narrative. If you go by political thought, liberty and equality together produce a paradox, and there is a way you solve this paradox. Akhil Bilgami, a very great philosopher, he will be in jail, I think today or tomorrow. He is one of the leading mind who is trying to solve that paradox. So, but is he going to be successful? is another matter, but he has an opinion how to solve that paradox. So, Indian religious tradition coming back, the first from this story and with an engagement of the contemporary and someone who is historically very in the past, the first thing in the religious tradition is what is the focus, central focus of the religious tradition. Uh, Generally, if you have been taking this course, religion and society, right? So there are only in sociology there are only two elemental concepts on basis of which there can be any study of religion in sociology. The first concept, elemental concepts are important for any discipline to survive. So, for instance, physics, there has to be neutron, proton. You have to be certain about these physical features. In biology, you have to certain. You have a basic concept like cell. So, what is in the basic in the sociology itself? For Durkheim, it is the group life, the collectivity, and for the Weber, it is value, right? So our discussion, this approach towards the religion is more towards a value approach, means what it constitutes as a meaningful interpretation in relation to life itself. What should be done? So this is more about knowledge. Religion is a knowledge. Indian religious tradition mostly and profoundly have two level of questions. Now I shift to this discussion to something more important discussion. Now this is little bit, I require your little bit more following of your concentration. You have to follow it, and we have to discuss something called philosophy of social sciences. So we can get this level. If we can go to that level, the religious discourse in Indian context become more meaningful. Because you should ask this question. Today I was discussing with a friend. What will happen when you experience the limit of understanding? What is the reply? In the West tradition, still now they say ultimately with the Kant and Rousseau, autonomy of individual. But for us, in Indian narrative, with the experience of limit of understanding, what you do, what the best yoga do, is you go and move towards certain type of co-relational experience. You and nature are not two, but one. Something together. Now this we will try to discuss this post limit of understanding, how the religious tradition respond and the Western certain type of sciences respond, and then we are discussing something called the quantum mechanics, right? So only at that level this correspondence can happen, because this all social sciences what we generally read in sociology of religion has an implication of what we call Newtonian physics. In Newtonian physics there are certain properties and elemental character of the properties, and people have taken in social sciences also. But from a different perspective of a quantum physics, now the social sciences, philosophy, all has been transformed. Though Indian religion tradition has already an approach towards such type of observation. Whether it is sciences, whether it is social sciences, whether it is a religion, there is something called observer effect. Generally, you have read social sciences. You have the paper on methodology of social sciences, right? So if you remember, the Vivek sir gave a reader what is called Gulbenkian report, and you go back in that section. There is a initial pages they discuss about deflection between philosophy and sciences, right? And if you don't take that further, the movement of diversion, but the philosophy's main concern is, and that is a concern of all the sciences, social sciences, it to arrive certain type of categories which is not influenced by an observer. Physics try to do this, and they produce certain type of laws in nature, right? Though your three laws of Newton, three laws of motion, and in the biology and chemistry. So what is observer effect? So observer effect is very simple. You see something and you tell its property and nature, but it is not influenced by the observer. So you say, people generally say, no, we influence it. In classical physics, take a very classical example. You close your eyes, is the sun is going to revolve around the earth? Earth is going to revolve around the sun? Yes. If you don't see, if you feel very bad, you are unhappy, is this property relation between earth and sun will change? Physics says no, it doesn't change. So this is called a classical case of observer effect, where subject and object have a difference. Now this is an implication on the Kant himself, and his project is also about finding those categories, those bases of knowledge in human life, which is not implicated by the observer who is observing the reality. And this is the basis of the anthropology which you have been studying. There is a book written by Kant, the last major book. It is called Anthropology from a Pragmatic Point of View. And major work of his thought is, can we understand human beings can understand material world? It's all fine. And there is no sense of, there is no question till then was that the human can understand, decipher, represent that natural world as an objective reality. So through the concept, through the laws, we have tried to figure it out those objective reality. So can man do for themselves? That questions Kant himself laid in the Anthropology from a Pragmatic Point of View. And that is actually first book of anthropology. This has to be taught if it has been taught. If it has not been taught, the theoretical context will be missed. For him, participant observation, non-participation observation, and then making certain type of generalization about life. That's why people started studying anthropology, marriage, family, to know certain type of characteristic, nature of human nature, human being itself. To know the laws by it has been governed. I showed how the certain laws work in Levi-Strauss structural anthropology. Certain type of breaking from the staticness, which can be very dangerous, which doesn't make humanity to communicate. For him, it is he says if you don't, the taboos would have not been there. We would have only tribal instinct limiting the mankind to know each other. Now, how much logically it is, how much it is consistent is another matter. So, as far as the sciences was concerned, the observer effect and implication in philosophy was there. Till you don't have the quantum physics. The quantum physics is generally, if everyone is aware, the first emphasis is observer affect the reality. At level of electron, the behavior of electrons, and if people are aware about the experiment, split experiment, double split experiment, when you see the behavior of an electron, if you have remembered the basics we have read in our science classes in 12th, at fundamental level, the elemental reality of a material part is it exists as a matter and also as a wave, right? Now, but at quantum physics, even this is not there. And only you intend the electron is going to be either behaving like a wave or behaving like a particle. So this is another debate. The consequences on the knowledge, epistemological question is that observer intention influence the objective reality of material particle. So this is the first great grand challenge happened to the physics in 1920s, and then since then it has never recovered from that. The Indian religious tradition, which I want to bring it, is they also emphasize a some level of objectivity in the experience, but objectivity can never produce what they call the primal principle, the principle by which other phenomena have an explanation. Why this happens, why the earth is sustained, why the solar system is sustained, why at first place there is a galaxies, why there is a stardust. So people say why there is space itself. So this why produces a metaphysical position of a god, which is maybe the primal condition. But nevertheless, this is very simplistic argument. The argument in Indian tradition is there is something term called prakrit. The prakrit produces the nature. Nature in sense certain properties. So they see, if you know more about quantum physics, or after quantum physics there is something called string theories appear. The possibility of this type of universe is one of the possibility. It's not only the possibility. So the characteristics we see as a visible universe is not a characteristic per se of the realities which manifest it. So there are more possibilities, and that's why in 2016 it is very convincing argument in the upper circle of the physics community that there is no one universe. It's very profoundly expressed. There is something called multiverse. Now, why I am just telling so many things is it easily to misrepresent something without being serious student of something. So generally, you go outside, and it happens with the professors, it happens with the teacher, it can happen with an age. You go on outside, you see a temple notoriously built at some corner of the street to occupy that space, and then you see a most illogical, uneducated person turning into a priest and doing something. So that is what not rigorously, if you want to understand why this idea, why this utility of the concept would have historically arrived, or if there is some sense of reality in it, rather than to rigorously account is to parallelly read it. And I can tell easily, if you are reading Indian tradition, there are good Western scholarship on that. There are good productive, even from the science community, even from the religious community, there is a good dialogue. So Indian tradition of the in a religious tradition, with one certain question about human ethics, what right and wrong should be done, the argument are still inconclusive. And from this stems the argument of tolerance. From this stems the argument of non-violence. Once you do not know the appropriate thing to be done in a situation, extreme behaviors has to be avoided, and that is the basis of the non-violence. Whether the Buddhist tradition or the Jain tradition. When I don't know epistemologically, I can never decipher the objective condition of ethics. It's better to be non-violent. So this is why the tradition of non-violence has been used. Because Indian religious traditions were strongly knowledge-seeking traditions. If you interpret in that way, you see the traditions, you read the books, you read the major texts. The most important is to what is the basis of human nature, from where this all comes. Nevertheless, there is a metaphysical orientation also, and in science also there is a metaphysics. But the question of observer effect, can man truly represent the most objective criteria of the knowledge like God, is inconclusive. Do you see it is inconclusive? Hence, there have been, if somebody asks you why there have been so many religious traditions, new religions could grow in India, because of this basic argument which is coming from very back, from the very long ancient time, because the debate is inconclusive. For a Buddhism to emerge from Buddha, the debate is inconclusive. From Mahavir point of view, the debate is inconclusive. They could not figure it out and could not bang on certain one human experience, giving you the very, very objective condition of human nature. And hence, you have to be tolerant and you have to keep on experimenting about the thing. So this is from the dimension of religion as a knowledge discourse, which you can trace back to the Weber himself. If this is the angle, there can be another angle. Religion is a social discourse, and then you can also take a critical look how the religious ideas has produced stratified communities, lack of existence of hierarchies. So this is another way to look at it. But from knowledge discourse, this type of communication and continuous dialogue is required, and only then it makes sense. I gave you an example of Somnath, his work. His work and stories are last stories is that very important story, that whatever rules has been generated, whatever knowledge has been generated, the best understanding of our age, one future event can put everything into the skepticism. You may end up having no situation to respond to it. And that reflects whatever has been produced as a human character, rules and regulation and custom, actually have still lacks the condition of being very universal to human nature. This is very, very revolutionary idea. Somebody is writing in 4th century.
I just got really confused. You said in the beginning that taboo enables some form of permanence in the group, and then in the later part, I don't know, maybe I misheard it or whatever. And in the second part, you were talking about that how taboo also annihilated the staticness of a group so that it became a very progressive trend. So I kind of didn't understand it.
Now, I said this, maybe sometimes you speak so much, something has to be misunderstood. A taboo is from the Levi-Strauss part. Taboo, by having taboo, the group will not mate it between them. So what it does for Levi-Strauss, it makes you to marry outside a group, right? And this is what he writes in the article. He said it's like a type of something is negated, something is required, but something has to be refuted. He says these taboos and cross-cousin marriages, in a sense. Later in the letter of the article, he abandoned the utility of a cross-cousin marriage analysis, he end up this, whom to marry is very prescriptively now open in Western society. But still to have a taboo is to keep on annihilation of an staticness possible through in-group mating. And he'll find this argument as very important sign of progress. He says by which this you leave the little word of a tribes, where tribes get restricted by setting up the condition from how much they have to look for a mating potential. He said by having this taboo and openness as far as whom you are going to have your partner, Western societies keep on having this experience of the dynamism. That is the word he used. He used the word called, it doesn't freeze you. The taboo doesn't freeze you into a group. Form of permanence, if suppose you exogamy and endogamy rules. So if there is a Munda tribe, so Munda tribe has a lot of division on the basis of the totems or on the basis of the descent. So it is a limit in which you will marry. Suppose there are exogamous groups, suppose of this claim, but they are all of Munda and they will all intermarry, but they will not intermarry inside. But by having this nature, there is a limit of also to whom the Munda tribe will interact in future in a long history.
So are we saying that taboo then gives a structure to the group?
No. Levi-Strauss say being a universal experience of certain type of blood taboos as far as mating of a family is concerned actually have a function, which have made progressive communication to a wider humanity. Humanity could communicate. Otherwise, this taboo would have been not there. People would have in group mated and would have remained very static. So that is his argument. This is called imaginative thinking. You have to imagine, then you have to build up a logic on which basis Somnath never met Levi-Strauss. Intention of Levi-Strauss is beyond Somnath. But as far as analysis, making a claim about certain nature of human society or society itself, there can be dialogue. Somnath has a skepticism. There can be an event. All the rules which you have generated as meaningful, functionally, and very relevant can be seriously questioned itself. And that's why the knowledge has its own, the understanding has its own limitation. And that's why understanding becomes historical.